Okay. So then, once again, welcome to this webinar. I made it a little bit a game, BDD versus Visual ATDD. To start with, maybe we should explain a little bit about the context about smart testing. Smart testing is a French company, a French tool vendor. We are Smart testing exists already for quite a long time. They always worked on visual test design solutions. They gathered quite a lot of experience in that domain. In 2015, smart testing underwent a complete reorganization and also reorganized completely the product portfolio. And the major product of smart testing is called YEST. Say yes to test if you need something to recall the name. YEST is a visual test design tool, not to confound with visual testing. It's a visual test design, meaning that you are writing your test cases or drawing your test cases and then have a test case generator. Other people say model-based testing tool, but YEST is more than just a model-based testing tool. Now, as we all know, a fool with a tool is still a fool. So what you need is also some methodology and not just a tool. And this is exactly what my webinar today will be about the approach which is supported by YEST, which is called a Visual ATDD. So some words on my person. I am Anne. I'm with Smart Testing since April this year. Prior to that, I was a project manager, consultant, trainer. I was quite involved in model-based testing tools and methodology, and this is also how I came to smart testing. I will be the presenter today. And the webinar is also the soundtrack of a poster we had at the UCAT 2 weeks ago. This was the user conference on advanced automated testing in Munich. And we had there a poster from low to living documentation with Visual ATDD. And I thought it a good idea to have also some explanation of the poster, and so I combined both of it. The focus of the webinar is not exactly the same focus than the poster, but we will use this the circles as well as a starting point, because this was a very particular poster. Unfortunately, I do not have it with me because it remained in Munich. But it was an interactive poster. So those circles are able to you can turn them around, and it will help me to explain what we are talking about today. So today's agenda is first the introduction, where we are already in the middle of the introduction. Then I will talk about where we come from, development, test-driven development, acceptance test-driven development, and then visual acceptance test-driven development. I will explain what BDD Gherkin means, and then we come to the core part, which is the comparison of the two approaches, and hopefully the discussions we will then have. So let's start. Well, in the beginning, the core is always development. And you can say today that agile processes have become the rule and not the exception. The more than half of the software development departments or organizations are working with Scrum or Kanban or some other agile processes. For the developers and also for the testers, this means that we have rather short iterations, that we have working software in the end. We have a quite accelerated rhythm of writing, testing, and delivering software. Scrum and Co, the agile processes, also introduced concepts like quality is the task of the entire team. And in fact, the agile processes did a lot for quality assurance. Testing became quite important with approaches like test-driven development, where the idea is that you test it's a shift-left approach with a common maxim: test early and often. And there's nothing earlier than writing the test cases before writing the software, the real code you want to test. And that's the core idea of test-driven development. You first write your test scripts. Of course, they are failed because you do not have anything to test yet. Then you write the code you want to test. It becomes green, but you're not done yet. You still have to refactor to get the code clean. So this is also one of the core concepts of test-driven development, that you do not accumulate technical debts. If you want to do this, test-driven development is really done in micro cycles. So you test really early and often. If you want to do that, of course, you cannot do your tests manually. So we can say the test-driven development, at least this approach, is equivalent to you have to automate your test cases. This is really on the development basis. We talk about unit testing, or even more details than unit testing. But we also have, with the agility, we have our requirements, or in Agile, we have user stories, and we want to test that those user stories are fulfilled. So now we come to acceptance testing, and the concept of acceptance test-driven development. So the idea of acceptance test-driven development is that you start with the user stories that are written by the product owner in some collaboration tool like Jira, Microsoft ALM, or others. And then the user stories are quite general. They need more explanation, and this explanation is given through the acceptance criteria. The acceptance criteria are worked out together with in this famous Three Amigos workshops, where product owner, testers, and developers sit together, and they think of usage scenarios that are examples of how the user story will be implemented. And the reason why this approach is very helpful, and also quite famous and well liked by the community, is that you write the acceptance criteria, and the acceptance criteria serve as specification by example, but they also serve as a test specification. So to be able to the most famous representative of acceptance test-driven development is behavior-driven development, so BDD. And BDD usually comes together with the so-called Jenkins syntax, which is the syntax, the semi-formal syntax of given, when, then. And you can also combine several givens, several whens, and several thens. So given a particular situations, when I perform some actions and I confirm this action, then I get what I want, roughly speaking. Those tests, if you write your acceptance criteria that way, you can execute them manually. This is already a specification of what you want to do. It is also, that's very important, a specification of the user story by example, because we get more details on how the user story is implemented or shall be implemented. But as we said, for test-driven development, this is also true for acceptance test-driven development. What we in fact want to do is we want to automate our tests. And this is in behavior-driven development. This means that we take those given, when, then scenarios, and we add keywords to it. So each row in this scenario, each given, each when, each then, is in fact a keyword, sort of function call. And if you add list the keywords, then you get your test script. And that's the idea of behavior-driven development. You can write with using this semi-formal syntax. You can specify your acceptance criteria, and at the same time, you already specify finally also the test scripts, not only the manual tests, but also the test scripts, which can then be executed in your favorite test execution framework, like Ranorex, Selenium, Cypress, or whatever. This is acceptance test-driven development using BDD with Gherkin. This works very well, but we have to be conscious that the focus of BDD is user stories. So we write our acceptance criteria for the user stories, and they are necessarily they are limited to the user story, and the user story itself is necessarily limited in scope to one sprint. If you have short sprints of 2 weeks, for example, then the user story cannot be larger than 2 weeks. So you get a rather granular view of the system. And this can be a problem, especially for systems where you have a lot of interdependencies of the user stories. And this is where Visual ATDD comes in. So the idea of Visual ATDD is that you specify your epics or the tests you want to perform to accept the entire system in using visual test scenarios. So we talk about this visualization. I will give an example in a minute, which is added to the user stories or added to the epics in Jira or in your preferred collaboration tool. Then you use you continue just as for BDD. But you do not discuss or not immediately discuss BDD scenarios. You discuss these visual test scenarios. This is the order in which we want to execute our test cases. We first want to have to create a customer before we can add a credit to this customer or rent him a car or whatsoever. So this is exactly what you visualize in the scenarios. But then you have also the testing view, and the testing view is, we want to have the different situations. Credit is, you can get a credit, but you can get the credit only if it's not above a certain sum, and you can get a credit only for various products, and not to buy. You get the credit for a car, but not for a house, for example. So this logic, what you want to test with valid and invalid parameters, this you write in decision tables. Decision table based testing is a very helpful approach when you have systems to test that are heavy in logic, that really have heavy business logic. There are also nice possibilities to define those those decision tables to determine the business rules using a haptic method called example mapping. This is not the topic of the webinar, but just briefly said, you have different cards. You write your user story on the yellow cards, the business rules on the blue cards, the examples on the green cards, and the questions on the red cards. And as you can see in this example here, we have quite a lot of questions. Don't think that this user story is fulfilling the definition of ready. Then visual acceptance test-driven development, or Visual ATDD shortly, is a model-based testing approach. Meaning that from the information we have in the visualization, in the workflow, and the information we put somewhere behind in the decision tables, we have a test case generation, giving us test cases that can then be executed either manually or automatically. Because once again, with having the same concept as for behavior-driven development, we can say that each row in the decision table corresponds to a keyword. And we have this advantage. We also have in behavior-driven development that even testers, manual testers that do not necessarily know are programmers, are not necessarily programmers, but they are pretty good in knowing the system and what the users are doing with the systems. They can contribute to automation because they are still able to say that open browser and open the function or the keyword open URL are they belong together. So Visual ATDD, as you can see, shares quite a lot of concepts with BDD. For example, the discovery of the user story and the solution is similar. We start with the user story and the apex, and then we start specifying or clarifying what is really meant by the user story through usage examples. Just as in BDD, we have test scenarios that illustrate how we want to challenge the system, and for the developer, or the developers, this also shows what is expected from them. Also, this collaboration part is similar. So the discovery is done either on the BDD scenarios or on the visual workflows and the decision tables, and it involves all the important roles. The three amigos: product owner, the developers, and the testers. We have a formulation of the test scenarios. The idea is the same. The way it is done is different. In BDD, we use the Jenkins syntax with a structured text given when then. In Visual ATDD, we use the graphical workflows. And we have a common idea that we want to automate our test cases for the automated test execution using a keyword-driven approach, and thus introducing an abstraction layer that helps us to keep away programming language specific aspects from those who specify the test cases. So this is the common idea. Here we have a more realistic example of a BDD scenario. The user story is a travel request, so we think about a human resource management tool. When you go on leave, you have to ask whether you, or on a business trip, you have to ask first, and this can be accepted or rejected. This user story here is the case where the travel request is rejected. As a manager, I can reject travel requests of my employees so that I can manage my team's budget. This is the user story, and the scenario. One of the acceptance scenarios would be a travel request rejected due to the reason too expensive. Given I'm logged in as manager Emma, when Peter creates a travel request and Peter is in Emma's team, and Emma rejects Peter's request because it's too expensive, then the travel request of Peter is rejected with reason too expensive. So it displays the right reason to Peter. The scenario illustrates quite a lot of aspects that are not contained in the user story. For example, that the manager, Emma, cannot, that Peter has to be in Emma's team so that Emma can reject or probably also accept the travel request. We will have more examples like that for too far away or too long or whatever. So we have for the travel request rejected, we have as many scenarios as we have reasons why it can be rejected. It can also be incomplete, for example. So, but this is fine for the user story, but the problem is when we start thinking of longer scenarios, of scenarios that cover really the entire process from end to end. So we talk about the tests that are to the top of the testing pyramid, system testing and end-to-end testing. Then I can, of course, still write my scenario. It would then look like this example. I will not read this in detail, but it becomes less easy to read. And the advantage we had with BDD, we lose it when we start thinking about epics, when we want to test epics with BDD Gherkin. Especially if you think that this is not the only scenario. I mean, we start talk here about one scenario. We have quite a lot of scenarios, and that's where Visual ATDD is helpful. So I leave you some time to read the flowchart. Okay, you understood the system, no? I mean, I have to admit, this is no surprise because you probably all have already asked for business, for a travel request for a business trip, and you. That's the way we would imagine that it works. But if you think of your system, the system you want to test, it looks different, and maybe you agree with me, hopefully you agree with me, that having an overview like this is really helpful. I mean, I have quite a lot of information in this workflow, and it gives me really an overview. The user stories are on the one level below, I would say, one abstraction level below. They are in the travel request, in the travel request approval, in the refund request, and so on. There's a question in the questions part. Can we model multiple access controls? Multiple access controls, meaning that you have to be logged in with different rights as Peter or as Emma. Is this, do I understand the question correctly? That's correct. Okay. Yes, of course. But yeah, you can put the information like that here in the workflow. So I'm a big fan of this, the possibility to add notes to actions. So you can add a note and telling people that for the travel request, you have to. It is sufficient to have the employee's right, and that for the initiation of the reimbursement, you need different rights. But strictly speaking, when we talk about that we want to test this, if I go back here to the level we had before, here we have this concept in the BDD scenario. We have this concept of everybody is logged in with his own account. We also have this information here, but it's not in the on the highest level, not on the visualization part. It's in the decision tables. So in the decision tables are those small tables here. If you click on it, then you come to the decision table. And for example, this is the decision table for the when the travel request is accepted or not. So if it's up to 5 days and it does not cost more than 1,000 euros, then it is accepted. And as a reason, the reason that is displayed to Peter is valid, that it is a valid request. If it's up to 5 days, but more expensive, then it's rejected because it's too expensive. If it's more than 5 days, but not too expensive, it's still rejected because it's too long. And if it's too long and too expected, then maybe there may be another reason. I made my life easier for me, and I shortened the story there. So what I did not show here, because is the test steps. So if you have conditions that you have to be logged in, then you would have more conditions here, and you can also have columns with the test steps, or you should have columns with the test steps telling what you really want to execute for the test. There you have the login as a manager, or login as HR, or as an employee. So this is what Visual ATDD looks like. And using then Jest as the preferred tool, then you can from the workflow and the decision tables you have for each of the actions in the workflow, you can generate your test scenarios. The idea behind is that you cover all workflows and you cover all the rows of the decision tables, because this is exactly what you want to test. And you get scenarios like this one: create and submit travel request up to 5 days and up to 1,000 euros. The travel request is transferred to the manager. Then validate the travel request. Is this accepted with the command valid? But then I have an incorrect refund request. The refund request is set to the manager and verified. The refund request is rejected, for example, because I did not add the proofs I had to add. So it's a little bit simplified, the example, but this is those scenarios are then the description and the specification by example of your system, and at the same time, those are the currently still manual tests for your test execution. So here we still see how this works together. We have the workflow, and well, you can see in green the path which is covered by this test scenario. Yeah. This is also a very nice feature of Visual ATDD, that you visually you can see what the test scenario means in your entire workflow. So as I said, the manual tests, but as I said before, you can also add keywords. Keywords would mean that each row here is in fact a keyword, and it is parameterized, so that we get this in blue here. We have the parameters. And so the testers who write the tables and who generate the test scenarios can prepare already test scripts for automated test execution. Yeah, when we look at Visual ATDD and the level it works at. So we have features, for example, or epics, but let's speak about features. And then you break down your features into user stories. And your user stories have acceptance criteria. Oh, I'm sorry for the French. I didn't realize it's still French. Then the workflow, the visualization is at the level of the feature, because it describes really a high level view of your system. The tables you have, they are at the level of the user stories and at the acceptance criteria. And this is the major difference to BDD. Because when you look at BDD, you have your feature and you break it down also to several user stories. But let's just look at one user story. This user story has then acceptance criteria. And for the acceptance criteria, we have those different examples. So the view is much more granular, much more limited to the user story and the different aspects to be covered in the user story. And Visual ATDD has this higher level view, or combines both views. So to conclude, I have the similarities. I have the 3 Amigos workshops. We discuss on the visual part of the workflow, and we discuss together also the different scenarios we want to test, which are specified in the decision tables. We have the same context of specification through example. It's really a shift-left approach. Both BDD and Visual ATDD are shift-left approaches, because we think about how we want to test the system even before we really implemented the system. And we have this test early and often means also automation. We have this link to keyword-driven test automation. There's a question on how do I capture dynamic test data? Does tests have integration with third-party test data management tools? Dynamic test data mean the test data changes throughout the process. Let's say I have someone applies for the job and the status is applicant, and once he gets the job or she gets the job, then she's no longer applicant but employee. Yeah, do you mean that? You can correct. Suppose a login screen tests 1,000 user credentials. If you test 1,000 user credentials, I would say you are not on the E2E or on the system testing level, because this is really, you have the user story, you have the login, and then you have it's rather unit testing or component testing, I would say. So this is not the scope of Visual ATDD, and it's even not the scope of BDD, I would say. But still, test data is an important topic, because we also have data that evolve in our process here, but we have an expectation how they evolve. And the testers know that the new status should be employee and no longer applicant. So we can manage this test data. I did not foresee a tool demo. I invite you to contact me to show you a tool demo, to show you how YEST is covering this data, because here I wanted to compare the two approaches. But if you have time left in the end, I can also show the tool. I have it in the background. Okay, have I missed a question? No. So those are the similarities. That's another question. For which project is the Visual ATDD the best approach? I would say Visual ATDD is best if you have user stories with strong interdependence, or if you have a really heavy business logic. Insurance, banking are definitely good examples. Also, web stores are good examples, but I have a project currently in well, it's traffic control, anti-collision control. This is also quite good, because there are quite a lot of conditions when the alert is given and when it is not. So if you have, if you struggle keeping the overview, and the only way you find to be sure you cover everything is that you concentrate on your user stories, and then you do quite a lot of testing of situations where you where in fact you have the impression that you already tested it before. Then Visual ATDD is perfect, because Visual ATDD comes up with quite few tests and a good coverage, because the tool makes sure that you covers the entire workflow and all the rows in the decision tables. Okay. Then what do you mean by keywords? Is it tied to a specific test execution tool such as robot, or is there any implementation of reusable actions? Well, in practice, you have your test automation framework, and you have your test automation libraries, or you're starting to set them up, and the keywords are given by what you already have. So yes, I'm thinking of Robot or Selenium or Ranorex or Cucumber. You can also do a Visual ATDD and generate Cucumber tests for Cucumber in it's a parameterized function call. That is what I mean by keywords. There's another question. Will this be a best fit for greenfield type of implementation, or rather legacy brownfield implementations? Will this be best fit for greenfield type? So you mean a completely new implementations, or like a legacy or brownfield implementations?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. We are often asked, or quite often when we present Visual ATDD and we present YEST, then the reaction is quite often, oh yeah, that's fine, but it will probably be better to start when we start our next development, to start with YEST. And I think, well, it's a good idea to start with YEST when you start a new development. That definitely is a good idea, but especially when you have legacy, then you start getting struggling keeping the overview. I mean, the test cases have been written by people that are no longer in the company, or maybe no longer, at least no longer in the same team. You have user stories. Your product backlog includes a lot of user stories which overwrite themselves newer user stories are more valid than the older ones. And what you start lacking in those systems is the view of what is currently really the system doing. What is our current view of the system? And this is why my poster was called From Low to Living Documentation, because Visual ATDD provides you with this documentation. You have a view of the system, and this works. It becomes a living documentation if it becomes easier to change the workflow and the decision tables and to regenerate the test cases than to change the test cases manually. And this is a trap you have to avoid. Do not start with the approach. This is what happens with most MVT tools. You start and it's wonderful, and you start understanding your system, and then you have generated your test cases, and then you continue working on your test cases. And then you have no longer this living documentation aspect, because you get lost in the test cases. But you need a tool. I'm talking about Jest, of course. You need a tool that makes it so easy to change the visualization part and the decision tables that it is easier to do that than to change directly the test cases. Then you get really a living documentation. Okay, there are more questions. Can we convert existing codes written in Java or C# to the system? Is well, in Jest, we do not have the code. It's a real visual test design tool. So we are writing test cases, test scripts, but on a keyword level only. So test scripts look like a list of keywords. The existing code you have of your is the implementation of your keyword libraries, and those are separated from Jest. Jest is not a test, neither a test execution tool nor a test management tool. Is really in front of it. It's the tester's development environment to develop test cases. I mean, I always say we tester are we are really masochists. Developers have their IDE. They have a compiler telling them that they have declared a variable, but they do not never use the variable. That they have redundancies. That code. They have syntax highlighting of specific of the programming language specific words. And what testers have? What testers have, they are glad if they have one field for the test step, one for the expected result, and one for the actual result, and the possibility to link requirements or user stories. Then we think we are glad because we already have an application lifecycle management tool. And maybe we even have a spell check, but we do not have any possibility to see whether we really completely covered all the equivalence partitions of the test. And this is where Jest comes in. This is exactly what Jest delivers, this development part of the test cases. This also answers the last question in the questions part. Is there an available integration with Jenkins for supporting CI/CD pipeline? There is, if you have one. If you have your test automation tool integrated in the CI/CD platform, then you can, of course, generate your test scripts with Jest and put them each evening in the commit or whenever you do your continuous integration, and they will be executed. Next question. System level requirements and coverage view. How do we get these if we use these graphical workflows? Do we need to document again all those requirements based on this living workflows? Okay, I'll finish the slides and then I will show the tool. Because I think that's easier to understand if you see the tool. So to conclude with the slides, we have differences is the format between BDD Gherkin, with the semi-formal textual format for BDD and the visual test workflows for Visual ATDD. The perspective and the scope is different because we have atomic user acceptance criteria of atomic user stories in BDD Gherkin, whereas we look at the entire functionality and we target system and end-to-end testing in Visual ATDD. And the degree of automation, we have, of course, automated test execution also for BDD. But in Visual ATDD, we do not only have this automated test execution, we have also automated test case generation, because it's last but not least, we use an MBT tool in this approach. And of course, the tools are different. So let's have a look at the time. Okay, yeah, if you want a demo, don't hesitate to contact me. Ask, my email is very easy, ann.kramer@smarttesting.com, or you may also contact me on LinkedIn. And now I show the tool. So this is the famous credit application. We check first the credit data, then the credit data may be for something we do not give credits for, then we stop. Or the credit itself, we ask for a credit, or the customer asks for a credit, which is okay. Then we have to check whether the customer is already in our database. If not, we have to create it. Then we check the customer data, and maybe the customer does not have is an unemployed or other reasons why we would not want to give him a credit, then the customer is not eligible. Otherwise, he or she will get a contract, and the contract is recorded. So this is how the workflow looks like in the tool. And if you go into the decision tables, then you have those different conditions, just as I said, as I showed you in the on the screenshot. I zoom in so that everybody can read it. So there are different reasons. The age is important. You only get, in this example, you only get a credit if it's between 16 and the customer is between 16 and 70. So this is an example of the decision table, and you ask for the requirements. So the requirements, the link to the requirements, the traceability is established here. Here we have user stories. We can connect to Jira. We can import the Jira issues here. And then using drag and drop, link them to those rows in the decision tables. And once we generate the test cases, generating the test cases is really easy. You click on generate test scenarios. And then it will generate the test cases. I already have them. That's why it tells me no new one. Let's look at this this test case here. This is exactly what I showed on the screenshot, well, with a different example. When we export those test cases to, let's say, X-ray or ALM, then the traceability to the user stories or the requirements is provided. So if you have to have requirements, then you can establish the traceability here, and you do not have to do it manually afterwards. I hope this answers the question. So we also have a coverage view. We can see in the dashboard which objectives have been covered. Here, the coverage indicator for your requirements, for example, or your user stories. In this example, we have both requirements and user stories because it's the example covering everything we want to show. And well, in this example, of course, everything is green. But if you start writing your decision tables, then of course in the beginning you will not have covered everything, and you will see here what is not covered. There was another question, which is, are there any cloud-based tools for this? Well, Jest is not cloud-based. Jest is a desktop application, and I don't know any other tool similar to Jest that provides the same support. Because I said what you need is that it really works is that you have to have an IDE for testers. An IDE for testers means that, for example, you have different equivalence partitions. I'm here to the the bottom, and I enter a new value. I type something, then yes, indicates me that I never tested this new value here, which is normal because I just added it. But if I add it to duration, well, the duration is here in the credit. So I add a new line and I select my new value here. Then it becomes black and no longer gray. When I then type my text, what I want to check, I start typing my text, and there's auto completion. So check credit data, and this is already the parameterized text. In fact, I have 4 rows in this decision table, but they are all the same. This prepares the test automation already, because the only difference is in the row here to the left, in the conditions in this decision table part. If I change something, for example, I think this is not good German, good English, I want to check the credit data, then it tells me, well, if you use the same phrase in several places, do you want to propagate the change? And I can say yes, and it changed everywhere, including in the test cases where which were already generated. There's a question here: how well does this approach scale to large and complex systems? You, in the large and complex systems, you will probably have several workflows. You will not have the one and only workflow covering really everything in your system. This is not useful. This is also not practically not possible. But especially if the system is complex and large, then those different visualizations help you to understand. That's why we said it's on feature level. So for the feature, you have one, or maybe even there, you can have several workflows. You can have sub diagrams. To structure your diagram and also to reuse diagrams. So this helps you, all the advantages you have with modeling, you have it also in this Visual ATDD approach. One thing I think where it is different to most other MBT approaches is that in this case, you do not have this effect of you write a beautiful model, then you generate test cases, and then you have to select which of those hundreds of test cases that have been generated are useful and you want to execute. Because here in this approach, you just generate what you wanted to test. In fact, yes, that generates the minimum number of test cases required to cover the entire workflow and each row of the diagram. You can get more, of course, but because there's also the possibility to have an advanced generation and, for example, combine several tables, let's say a customer and credit data, and then we get 8 more scenarios, or we can even push it further and combine all the objectives, all the rows, and get the full combinatorics. But that's usually not what you want. You have the problem with system testing in sprints is that you have few time, and it is a problem that your test cases become more and more numerous. And this is also something that Jest avoids, because if we change something here, for example, we add another action. So we have a new task, and this new task is in this here in the middle. Then have a look here at my test cases. They started to be, there's one which is red now here to the top. For those who have maybe not the best screen, or not screen, but internet connection, I zoom in. All those tests are fine because the workflow does not go through this last part, but there's one test case which is no longer conform with the workflow. If I open it, it tells me that the workflow is no longer conform because we have a problem with the here. Here we have a problem. So now I ask Jester, well, okay, so how to fix show me valid proposals. And one valid proposal is that we add this task. And I have also other possibilities, and you can see here to the right that they correspond to different paths. I can accept it, and now everything is fixed. So we did not increase the number of test cases due to new user stories in the next sprint. It's still only my 5 test cases, and it was easy to fix them, and it was easier to change the workflow than it was to change the test cases manually. Okay, next question. Can you manage versions and feature changes using tests? If so, how? Okay. I am not sure I understand this question. Michelle already answered. Yes, you can manage your YEST project in Git quite easily. This is also what I think I thought that you can connect your YEST project to Git, and then you can push or pull from the server, and this is how we collaborate and having several authors of the YEST project working on the same project. There's one thing I did not show is that YEST also synchronizes with Jira. You can see the workflow here and the decision tables also in Jira, and you can even edit the workflow in Jira. You cannot edit the tables in Jira. This for that you need YEST, but this I did not prepare to show because I did not really prepare a tool demo. How do you handle different test levels as this broken down becomes the input to developers? But what do you use for the acceptance tests? Okay, I would say unit testing is completely apart. Unit testing, you have the testers, the developers. They are pretty good at unit testing. At user story level, when you start talking about acceptance tests, but this is a user story acceptance test. This is yeah. Do you still have test levels in Agile? Not really. Yeah, we have the test quadrants, and what we cover here is we have both the tests of the user stories, and we have the test of the user stories, and we have the end-to-end aspect of system testing. Beware of not trying to test each value of each input field, each control in your acceptance tests. This is more for unit testing. Whether you enter negative values and characters in a field where you can enter, should enter a numeric value. This is well covered in unit testing, and this should not be the topic in those acceptance tests. But if this is test-driven development, I would think our test cases defined in YEST would go to the developer to drive the development. Yeah, they do go into this view here is discussed by the 3 amigos, and they discuss on the new task here is the new user story. Is it really here, or is it before where it enters? What are the conditions? What is expected in the user story how shall it work? What are the scenarios we want to test? And for developers, this is really the input. It is test-driven development, but it's acceptance test-driven development. Yeah, I'm not sure whether I answered the question. I'm even sure I did not fully cover the question. But maybe my point, the test we define become closer to unit tests, and thus we are missing acceptance tests. Yeah, that's exactly the problem. That's also the problem BDD introduces. BDD works quite well, and people are doing it, and then they focus only on the user stories and on the acceptance criteria of the user stories, and they lose the system testing aspect. And system testing being usually poorly automated, they do not have the time. The system tester, first of all, they are quite often they are not even in the loop. They have to see how they get the information the developers share in the sprint, and how do they keep up with this frenetic sprint iterations. And this is exactly Visual ATDD that helps them keeping up, because it helps limiting the number of test cases, it helps updating the test cases, it also helps automating the test cases. Klaus, I would be glad to discuss this in a call just with two of us. So please contact me afterwards, and we can talk about it. Okay, there's still questions coming in. I mean, different versions of feature changes and also different behavior based on old, new product versions in which the expected result may differ. So you need to support both and the old and the new behavior. Oh, that's a bit difficult question, yeah. So you have you have an old version of your product and you have a new version of your product, and you have to branch also your yes project. You have to branch the model, because there's a description of the old one which may vary and diverge from the new one. Yeah, and Michelle answered that in the decision tables you can also tax for the version of the product. Of course, yeah, you can also say if it's if it's not the flow that differs, but just the behavior in one action, then of course you can say, okay, for the old version it behaves like that, and for the new version you have this new button, which is available. You can even have in the workflow, you can have the conditions that, for example, the subdiagram is only called if it's the new version. But it becomes complex then. Beware of not programming your workflow. It's meant to be simple. It's meant to be pragmatic. And it's meant to help understanding. And once you add too many conditions in the workflow, then also workflows can become difficult to see. And then you have a problem you have we had in the past with model-based testing. That models are not that easy to maintain. This workflow is easy to maintain because it's really very abstract, and we also do not have in the decision tables, we do not have the detailed steps of open this window, enter this this value, enter this value, click on confirm, and click confirm once again. You can add that. You have the possibility to add low-level descriptions and to add a more detailed description if it is helpful, but you do not necessarily have to. Okay. We reached the hour, and I think it's time to close. If you have more questions, if you want to see more of the tool, if you just want to discuss, do you want to contradict or see whether the approach works for you, for your system, feel free to contact me.
Absolutely. And it's time to thank all our participants. The replay video will be available soon, so you will be able to share it with your colleagues and managers possibly. And of course, we would be delighted to continue this discussion and the exploration of YEST with you. So thank you to all of you. It was really a pleasure to have you this morning. Thank you, Anne, for your presentation. Great. And thank you, all of you, for your questions, your reactions on the chat. That was really very interactive today.
Yeah, that was wonderful. It was really like how I expected it to be, how I hoped that it would be, with a lot of discussions.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. See you next time. Stay tuned with our activities, with our events, and there will be some more in the future, that's for sure. Thank you very much, all of you. Have a good day.
Goodbye.